realize it's real.
All right, sorry, go ahead.
I wanted to point to this. I think it's an issue with your worldview, is that I know that your worldview isn't solely feminist, right? But if you're arguing for a feminist view, do you agree that you would need to borrow from another view to apply feminism, at least like from an ethical position? I know Jay pressed you on your ethics and your epistemology. I'm not going to go into that, but the reason I'm asking is, if you held a view that says feminism is good and this is how I'm measuring it, and you think women should have rights, let's say, I'm not sure how you could make the argument that we ought to give women rights if you don't simultaneously argue that men ought to give them to you.
Because again, it's conflating men with the enforcement arm.
Well, if men collectively, whatever you want to call the enforcement arm, right?
The enforcement arm.
Yeah. So it's just what is an abstract collection of men mostly?
Dominantly men, but there are women in it too. And the most important thing is that the enforcement arm is given legitimacy from the ruling class.
I understand. Okay, so
which can be men and women.
So do you agree that there's an enforcement arm? Let's say the enforcement arm in this scenario is 96% men and 4% women.
I would just want, the issue is that the enforcement arm doesn't get to do wanton violence because it's a bunch of men that can do violence.
Well, they could.
Then they would be a rebel group, and they would be.
They could be a rebel group.
Yeah, but that's not what either of us are talking about.
That's called a rebellion.
Yeah, but neither of us are talking about rebel groups right now. We're talking about what
we are actually
arm
because
is. What legitimizes an enforcement
because
arm.
if that enforcement arm that's mostly men decided you don't get the vote, what leverage do you have? Please, pretty please? That's it?
That the enforcement arm doesn't ever get to decide that. In our society, it doesn't. Who gets it? Is the government.
If the government decides X and the enforcement arm says we're not enforcing that, is there any decision on X?
So do you think that Trump is
Answer the question.
Hold on, I'm answering your question with a question.
That's stupid.
It's not stupid. Have you never engaged with Socratic method?
No, that's not how it works.
It is. The Socratic method is asking each other questions in exchange.
Just answer the question.
Unless you want to just be like,
why do I have to answer your question if you don't answer mine?
I've answered all of your questions.
If someone passes a law, the ruling class passes a law over here.
Trump.
If they pass a law and the enforcement arm doesn't enforce it, is there any power in this? No.
No, but
cool.
hold on.
Arm.
It's not the enforcement arm unless you're going to tell me that police officers have more power in this country than Trump, which would be crazy.
It's not just police officers, okay?
Of course it's not just police officers.
Then why would you say police officers?
Okay, sorry. I should have also added soldiers.
Military, Navy SEALs, everything else.
I'm obviously meaning the entire enforcement arm, which is the thing we've been talking about.
If they decide to not go to work, does the policy or law have any power?
Do you think the enforcement arm is weaker than Trump?
What do you mean, Trump as an individual?
Yeah, our president.
Yeah, the enforcement arm could take over Trump if they wanted to.
So the enforcement arm is actually the one in control of our country, not Trump.
When it comes down to it, if the enforcement arm decides we're not doing this, right? We're changing our minds. We're like for instance, the same principle holds when someone does a boycott or they don't come to work, right? A protest. Mm-hmm. That has power, right? Leverage.
It's like a soft power, yeah.
Yeah. But if the job they're doing is actually enforcement, for instance, if police stop showing up, police have the power to stop showing up.
Do you want to know
Hold on, dude. Okay. Do police have the power and the will to stop showing up to crime scenes?
Yeah, but then all of their livelihood would be taken away. Right?
I understand, but if they risk that for something good, right? If they thought, well, that's a risk, but if it was an ethical view, right, they could actually do that, and that's leverage, right?
The issue is that in reality, the reason why Trump is more powerful, because I'm sure you actually agree with this, than the enforcement arm is because he has, for example, the ability that if the enforcement arm decided to rebel against him, he could immediately cut off all funding to any enforcement arm and immediately strip them of the ability to have arms. He could lock up facilities that they wouldn't otherwise have access to.
Hold on. Listen to what she's saying. Lock up facilities and take their arms, right? With what? Wait, ... Drum roll. With what?
What do you think banking is? Do you think banking is the enforcement arm? You want to focus on the one that works for you, but you don't want to engage with the other one.
That's what debating is.
Do you think banking is the enforcement arm? It's not dodging.
Look, you just ran into shit.
I'll just grant you. He would have to lock it up with his private secretary instead.
No force, okay? So if you said, a bunch of people rebelled against Trump, the enforcement arm. He can do X, Y, Z, and everything you listed would assume that he also has this other set of people that are force.
Banking would not insist that. He could.
What do you mean banking?
He could cut off all of their money immediately.
Yeah, you can
and
cut off.
ground all their planes.
Yeah, you can physically thwart. The internet and banking and electronics and all that
stuff. So he
stuff.
could cut off their entire ability to live.
Yeah, you can do that. Yeah, but the thing is...
that's not force,
right?
Yeah,
but look, do you think my argument is that you can't do different kinds of warfare? No. What I'm saying is that even if he did that, what's going to ultimately decide things over time is going to be a body of people.
Over time especially is going to be money. I'm sorry.
Money?
Yes.
Oh, really?
Yes.
So where money is meaningless, have you ever seen a situation where money is literally on the ground everywhere?
That's called inflation. That's not related to this situation.
So money, you think money is the determining factor?
I think money is probably one of the most important systems of leveraging power on the planet. Yes.
I understand, but if it comes down to money or pure military force, let's say a country is really rich, but they don't have a military. And there's another country
I'm not presenting these things as mutually exclusive.
Well,
right?
I'm pointing to the deciding factor that you keep trying to avoid. Every scenario you give, ultimately the deciding factor is muscle.
I'm not really understanding. So I've already granted you that muscle is really important. The enforcement arm is very important. The issue is that I'm trying to say it's a more complicated story than you want people to believe because it doesn't work to your narrative, which is that, for example, banking is obviously one of the most powerful things in the world.
Is it more powerful than force?
In an acute sense, no, of course not.
Cool,
but in
that's
long
all I'm
term,
arguing.
well, in a long term, for example, which a war is long term, you can't feed people, you can't do any logistics, you can't do any coordinating.
Do you need an enforcement arm in the threat of force to have a bank?
Yeah, but these things are intrinsic. Hold on, Jimbob, none of these are winning to your thing.
Yes, they are.
You're trying to act like force is the number one. It's the most important thing.
It is the deciding factor.
No, it's not.
What's another deciding factor if it's not force?
Tactics.
What? Tactics of what?
Of warfare.
Warfare is force.
Yeah, but it's not just force. Force is violence, right? Force is going pew pew.
Look.
You can't say force is now just all of these other things so that you can make your argument work.
If two bodies of force have equal tactical skills and knowledge, and one has superior force, who's going to win between the ones who are equal in tactical knowledge?
I already answered that. Can I add on to that?
No, what's the answer for the whole audience?
I already said the one with superior force.
Cool.
Here's the next question. Say they're equal in those ways. One has higher force, but the other one has 4 times the amount of money. Which one wins now?
The force.
Not necessarily.
What do you mean? How does money beat a gun?
Because you can hire other additional
Isn't
militia.
it weird, ladies and gentlemen, when I get robbed on the street, I can't throw my money at the person to defend
I'm not saying that money is
from
force.
a gun?
I'm not saying that money is force. I'm saying that when you're pretending this idea of force in the enforcement arm is so simple, it's just muscle makes right. Unironic.
I didn't say right. I said it makes.
You are saying.
No.
Yes. You're doing master morality.
Don't lie.
You're doing master morality. Yes, you are.
No, I'm not. Stop lying.
What is master morality?
I don't know, but it's not might is right.
So you're saying that you're not doing a thing
I assume
that you have
it's
no
might
idea
is
what
right.
it is.
I never heard the term, but if you're saying might is right, that's not a gotcha. I'm saying might is. This is why it's an important question. If you agree with me that might is, it's not right, it just is. It could be the case, it's right, it could be wrong, right? If it's a case that we both agree that might just is, that's descriptively true.
Doesn't exist.
It's descriptively the case that force wins. That doesn't say it's right, it wins. Yes?
Yeah, in a one-to-one.
Okay.
Again.
Stop.
No, the world is
not. Oh my
not.
God,
Jimbob,
insufferable.
I know it would be. Well, hold on.
Every time I get one premise out, you basically take us to Wally World. Just follow.
I have been following. The issue, Jimbob, is it's
follow.
Not this
simple. That means
simple.
Stop. That means be quiet for a second.
I don't have to do this
If we
with
agree that force wins, no one said it's right. If we agree that force wins, isn't the next logical question is, what philosophy or worldview informs the use of force? If pure force wins is descriptively true, Concentrate.
It's not. That's what I'm telling you.
Oh, it's not now.
No, because
okay.
you're now moving to a philosophical system of how you set up, for example, maybe nation states. We can maybe use force in the state of nation states. The moment that you go to that, this idea that just force wins is devoid of any of the complications of reality, right? The reality is that if you have a super strong force, but you don't have logistics, you don't have means to feed them, you don't have caretakers for them to take care of the wounded, you don't have a GDP to be able to fund them and make them strong and have like more ammunition.
Nobody's disagreeing with that.
You are fundamentally eroding these things
so
that you can just say force really matters.
Well, no.
But I've never said that force doesn't matter. I'm saying you're painting a really simplistic
never said
picture
those other things
when
don't
this
matter.
is complicated.
I never said those. You want to make it complicated so you don't have to deal with the entailments. But
no, I want to make it complicated because I would love for a discussion to slightly map onto reality.
Okay, cool.
Like just slightly.
All right, cool. So if you have two groups of two different armies, right, fighting out there in the field, do you think it's better for one or the other to be able to deal with the harshness of the elements in long periods of time?
Is it better to be able to
be in like the heat for a long period of time, to be carrying a lot of weight for a long period of time?
Yeah, of course. This is why men are better at the front line.
Gotcha. Okay, so if that's the case, it still comes down to brute force collectively. Even in the instance where you have to serve. Yes, it does.
No.
You have to carry food, right?
So, for example, if brute force was sufficient, Germany would have a much better time taking over Russia because they were fucking dumpstering. They had way more force on their hand. The problem is that they had a failed logistics system and that they had no way of managing the winter, particularly because their tanks got stuck in the mud.
And was there
which is why logistics and things like nurses, all of these things matter. So when you try to reduce the world to force, all you're doing is just pretending that the world is simple.
Even in that instance, did they lose to concepts, or did they also lose to another body of force?
What?
Did they lose to another body of force?
They mostly lost to technology failures and winter.
Does that technological failures, does that require
concepts?
Men?
No.
Okay, to avoid
developing a tank does not require men.
Oh, really?
No, it requires science.
Oh, listen, guys. Developing a tank doesn't require men.
It requires science.
Science is a method. What's the scientific method?
The scientific method is the process by which you use.
No, what's the method?
What?
Steps.
Yeah, I'm going to walk you through it.
What's the first step?
Okay, I can walk you through it.
What's the step?
The first step is going to be hypothesis generation.
No, that's an observation. Wrong.
No.
Yes, it is.
No.
How do you do a hypothesis on something you don't observe, dummy?
Okay, you're talking about basic science.
Yeah, you can't even tell me what the scientific method is. Science built tanks? No. Engineering built tanks, and men had to...
Do you think engineering
do you know
is
what a tank's made of?
Various things. There's like steel bodies.
Are they heavy?
Again,
have you ever seen? Do you think you could?
Jimbob,
do you think you could hammer in one of the bolts of the?
Second. Let's just go back. This is hilarious. Let's just breathe and go back.
You guys,
engineers
men don't build tanks. Science does. What are you, Neil deGrasse Tyson? What's wrong with you?
Do you think that we would have tanks without
men?
science?
No. Nobody said that. Men build tanks.
You just said
and use.
You heard it, guys. Science builds tanks.
You said that.
Because you were saying concepts don't. Of
men
course.
build tanks.
No.
Women don't build tanks.
Women just can build tanks.
Oh, can they?
Yes.
Really?
Yes, we have the science and technology for it.
Oh, you have the brute force to carry all of those heavy pieces of equipment?
Well, typically you're going to have like a carrying equipment. Yeah, you can use like forklifts and all the other shit that they use. Do you think that like, men by themselves are just like brute carrying?
Still. Yes, they are.
No.
Yes,
they're
they are.
using factories and robotics.
What are you talking about? They're not pure. By the way, who manages and builds robotics?
Men
Robots?
and women.
No, mostly men. Engineering, metalsmithing, machining, all of these things, large scale
building.
building.
Yes, it's disproportionately like occupied by men. But
Why is that?
This is more of the feminist argument at this point.
It's not.
It is because like by and large, women were barred from education, and that like these disciplines didn't reinforce.
Look, your own army. Let's say you have your own army, right?
I just can't believe you said that science doesn't build tanks. That is the most wild
engineering
statement I've heard
builds
today.
tanks.
Engineering is science, my friend.
No, science is
it is.
Science is natural, dude.
No, it's...
Yes, it is. It's study of the natural world. Tanks aren't natural, dummy.
Do you think that science didn't contribute to the development of tanks?
No, I didn't say that. I said science
They're
itself.
Not the natural world,
science,
dummy.
Can you engineer without science?
No.
Yes, you can.
No.
Yes, you can.
Not very well.
I didn't say well. If you can engineer without science, then it demonstrates that you can do engineering without science. The argument isn't whether or not science contributes The question isn't, I never said science doesn't contribute to engineering. I'm saying science itself as a methodology, which you don't even fucking know the method,
I do.
doesn't.
You
no, you
haven't
don't.
even let me speak.
You didn't even start with an observation.
Because a lot of science doesn't start with observation.
That's
For
not
example,
science.
basic science just hypothesizes free willy and then it tests it.
Like what?
Basic science, for example, would be one person was like just pretty sure that our gut biome, the ulcers that created our
They
gut
did that
biome
without
is bacteria.
knowing and observing what a gut biome is? They
No.
just imagine a gut biome without observing and knowing what it is?
No, the main actually thing is that they hadn't been able to observe the bacteria in there, but they proposed anyways that it was a bacteria. In fact, it was viewed as a very, very controversial
So they knew
thing
what
because they were
bacteria
like,
was?
Bro.
Did they know what bacteria was?
Yes.
Cool.
knew
So
what
they observed bacteria
was.
before. So they started with an observation to know what bacteria is. They know what a gut is. That's an observation.
Okay.
You can't
Do you
posit
know-
a hypothesis without. You can't do it without an observation.
Jimbob, I'm sorry.
What's wrong with you?
You're out of the depth. Do you know what
No,
the
I'm
difference?
not. You don't even know the scientific
Do you know
method.
what the difference is between basic and applied science?
Yes.
What's the difference?
Well, applied science is basically that's what engineering is. It's taking the conclusions, the regularity, the inductive reasoning from the scientific method and applying it into making shit.
What's basic science?
Basic science is natural science.
What is that?
You observe natural phenomena in the world. You have a hypothesis of what's causing the natural phenomenon. You introduce an independent variable. You remove it. You repeat, and then you come up with a conclusion, which is what produces a scientific theory.
Okay, so you don't understand this. So basic.
What?
Basic.
Tell me one thing I said was wrong,
Sure,
dummy.
I will. Just breathe.
Don't do this fucking passive-aggressive shit where you
calling
don't
me
understand this.
dummy.
Tell me
You're
what I got wrong.
interrupting me all the
Tell me
time.
what I got wrong.
I will, but you
Stop gaslighting me.
You have to stop.
You're a
interrupting.
professional gaslighter.
Brian,
Brian,
if I
Daddy,
can-
help me. Patriarchy, help me. I win.
Okay.
Look,
do you want me to
what
answer
did I
the
get
question?
wrong?
I will answer if you breathe.
If we can, let's try to avoid the ad homs and the
Fine.
insults.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So basic science is typically where a hypothesis can be generated without observation. It's something that essentially a scientist theorizes. And then they create a hypothesis to test it, and then they test it.
How do you
Applied science is using observations from nature or from the world around you and building off of these observations to create a more like targeted hypothesis of what we expect it to become and then testing that out. Most science that you're familiar with is part of this applied science branch because basic science is like more like what 1800s philosophers got to do where they just like whimsically were like, I wonder if I lick metal if it'll cure cancer, and then they tried it, right? That's what basic science was, where you just like try like hocus pocus shit to see if it works. Whereas applied science is going like, well, whenever I drop this ball, I notice that it hits this, and so I'm going to test and see if I drop different things of different weight, if it changes the velocity of dropping.
And which one of those built a tank?
I have no idea the history of science, but I'm assuming which part. Gunpowder, I suspect, probably wasn't science at all. The Chinese did it. I have a feeling that they kind of noticed these things like igniting one another. Maybe it was applied science. But for example, a lot of medical advancements come from basic science.
Yeah. Do you think you could load a cannonball into a...
Me personally?
Yeah.
I don't know how to work tanks.
No, I mean just a cannonball into a cannon.
Oh, yeah, probably.
You could load one in?
Yeah, I think they're about like 5 pounds.
Can you
a
pull
ball.
back the rail of a clock?
Like the inside gear mechanism?
To cock a gun. Can you do that?
Yeah.
Okay. Just making- Can you break down a gun? Clean
no.
it? Okay.
That's not a dunk. I've never.
Well, no,
claimed to.
it kind of is a dunk because a part of managing weaponry, even not just a tank, but even small weapons, you have to be able to clean it effectively, and you have to be able to use brute strength and be able to hold it firm. And so
I've
it
never
applies big and
denied
small.
that having some, like I've never denied that frontline soldiers are better served typically by men or by women who can achieve the same like physical standards that are erected for men.
Okay.
What I've actually done is said that science is the concept by which tanks emerged and then labor was used to build these things. But to act like it's men is again, it's just this reductive narrative of diminishing like how again you just get to steal valor because like men were in these roles. But there's a really complicated question of like why were men in these roles and maybe not women. women, and also there's a number
Why is
of
every
women that are
answer
involved
to
in
your
science.
philosophy, it's complicated?
Because the world is incredibly fucking complicated.
So do you
Jimbob.
understand it, or it's complicated but you understand it?
I understand elements of it, but it seems like I understand maybe more than you.
Well, no, it sounds like what you're
you didn't know
saying
what
is
basic science and applied science
every
was.
time I have you cornered, you say it's very complicated, which is a very common tactic with
hold on.
nonsense machines.
I don't just say it's complicated. I say it's complicated, and then I go on to list out the like sequelae and multifactorial elements that make it complicated. Nobody in their right mind would look at the world, look at like taxes or debt or banking or central banking. Nobody should look at these things and be like, yeah, it's really fucking simple. No, it's not.
Well,
Central banking, very complicated.
Well, but in this
tanks, very sophisticated and
in this
complicated.
debate, the simplicity, the thing that's being reduced as not complicated, it seems to be only complicating for you, honestly, is that the descriptive element of this debate that's true, that holds true, that you even agree with, is that it's primarily men who are applying force to maintain a society, whether it's law or the world itself or erecting buildings and maintaining all this shit.
Yeah, I mean, I've just agreed with that. The issue is that, like, we then got into, which you didn't really allow me to, which is like, who gives the legitimacy to those like young, able-bodied men to enact violence in a legitimate way?
A group of people who have
Authority.
superior
Government.
force.
No.
Yes.
No, government.
What? That's what a government is.
It's superior force. Trump is just stronger than
No,
the
the
colonels.
body of the government, which has an arm, the branch of force, is the government. It's all inclusive. It's all one big thing, right?
The military is not part of the government. No, not necessarily. The government rules over the military.
The military is not an arm of the government when the
it's
president
underneath.
is the leader of what?
Yeah, he's the leader of it. It's underneath him.
Is it a part of his governance?
Yes, but that doesn't mean that it is the government, right? The military is not the government.
The military
government
is not part of the government.
That's not what I said. I said that it isn't the government, right? The one that confers the authority to the violent pension
Is this
men-
hand a part of my body?
Yep.
Is it my body?
No, it's your hand and it's part of your body.
Okay, so it's not my body.
Well, it is your body and it's your hand, right? There's like a level of specificity that you can apply to
interesting.
things.
Cool.
Yeah.
So this isn't my body.
It is your body.
Oh, okay,
it's just
cool.
also your
Okay.
hand.
So if I'm the government,
do you think
and
that
this
that's
is,
analogous to the government?
yeah, if I'm the government and this is the enforcement arm of the military, is this the government by the same logic?
I'm sure.
Why are you
I guess I
wincing?
can-
Why are you wincing?
I'm wincing because again, it makes me wonder if you understand how your branches.
What is
of
wrong with your
government
brain?
work. Does your gut? Do you
I
understand?
used your logic.
What are the three branches of the government?
Legislative, sorry, finish it for me.
Executive,
Executive,
judicial.
judicial, gotcha.
Yeah, none of those are military, if you might notice.
The executive branch needs the military.
Well, it's under the executive branch.
Yeah, it's part of what are you talking?
I'm saying.
If you can't execute a policy, there's no executive branch.
Yes. So the military is under the president, right?
Yeah, and the president's what? What?
The leader
chief-
of the country.
Yeah.
Yeah, the military's under him, right? He gives the military the authority to do the violence. He
That's right.
legitimizes it.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying.
That's cool. That's in favor of my argument.
You know what?
That body can determine, right? Even if you think it's unjust, it can actually determine and take control. It could literally tomorrow could take your rights to vote, right?
I don't know why you're talking about the government when you don't even know the three branches of the
Look,
government.
I know you're going to hold on to that forever, but it pales like what you've said tonight.
Do you know what the
is-
legislative's role is?
It doesn't matter.
It kind of does.
It doesn't matter.
If you're g-
No,
if-
because the
this
argument is feminism.
This is the same thing. Well, we've obviously moved pretty far away from it. This is the same thing when we debated last time and we were talking about GDP.
What good is the legislative
You didn't
body that passes-
You're fighting me about concepts
Kyla,
you don't
Kyla,
even know.
Kyla, I'm not talking about the function of the government.
Just to be clear, it's fine if you don't know
Look,
these things.
if-
The problem is when
Kyla,
you weaponize
stop
your your
gaslighting.
ignorance
Stop your
about these
gaslight.
ideas.
All you have is
Can
gaslighting.
you please let me finish?
All you do is gaslight and gaslight and
I don't-
gaslight. That's all you do.
I don't know why you're
That's
talking-
literally your career.
You're like a Tumblr girl right
No.
now.
What good
I can
is...
start like cutting your wrists and being sad
Kyla,
too.
Kyla, focus. What
I see
good
you.
is legislating policy if you can't execute it with force?
It's no good. I'm.
Cool.
This is not the
Is the
argument that you were
legislative
making.
part of the... is that a part of the government?
The legislature?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, cool. So if the legislative branch is a part of the government that informs policy and makes policy and passes policy or whatever, if it's no good without force, right? If passing policy that gives you entitlements like voting or anything else you call liberty under feminism, if it's the case that the body of force could literally not enforce it at all, okay, you're at the mercy, just like me, of a body of predominantly men. Therefore, rights, as you argue them, this all branched from this very simple argument, is that you made an argument that women should have rights. I gave you the entailment of that. If you say women ought to have rights, which is a normative claim about what should happen, right? You're simultaneously saying, given that there's a legislative branch that writes that out and does it, you're simultaneously saying that people in the
legislative branch?
In the enforcement arm ought to defend and uphold that policy, right?
Sure. I guess.
Cool.
Here's my
So now
issue.
there's an obligation for men primarily,
No,
and from your feminist view,
it's
you
not for men.
cannot produce
Stop.
an
Nope.
obligation.
No, you lost
Feminism
there.
has zero obligations.
Okay, again, obligations. Men are not obligated to be police or soldiers. Soldiers and police are obligated to be police and soldiers because that's what they agree to, right? So this obligation, again, feminism, it doesn't obligate anything, but feminism isn't a doctrine of political governance, right? It doesn't have to obligate things in the way that like a government system does. For example, the government obligates you as a citizen to listen to the rules of the country, right? It's important. And I know you're going to be like, how do you enforce those rules? It's force. But after that, after we've gotten into that, it's really important for you to understand that when you're talking about feminism, it's not a political philosophical structure. And so when you're asking what the obligations are underneath it, it's not you're basically measuring like a truck when we're talking about rainbows. You'll be like, why doesn't this rainbow work like the truck does?
How do you put that many words out and say nothing?
Jimbob, I'm sorry, if you didn't understand that, that might explain why you don't know the three branches of the government.
Do I need crayons?
But just to be clear, I was pretty simple in what I just said there.
Okay, cool. So the question is...
You don't understand what I said
just
there?
to give it back, you agree that under your feminist view that you're arguing is better or good for society, that there actually are no obligations.
It's not a governmental system.
What?
That's what makes obligations.
Of course it's a governmental system.
Feminism is not a governmental system.
The moment you say women should have X rights, it becomes a governmental system. It's part of you're appealing to the government.
No.
What do you mean,
appealing to the government is not the same thing as being a government system. It is obvious that feminism is not equatable in any way to like a democracy or monarchy, which is how like power gets conferred.
I agree. I understand that.
Well, the issue is that you're pointing at feminism and being like, look at it, it has no obligations. And it's like, you're comparing that, but you're comparing that to a government system.
No.
But most worldviews don't have obligations necessary to them.
So what's better for a society? A society that has obligations or none? None.
A society that has obligations is obviously better because that's how you make nation states. That's how you make society.
Got you. So does feminism have obligations?
Again, it depends on what you mean by obligations.
Does your view of feminism...
Do you mean values?
No, any obligation. That means you're compelled to act a certain way. You're compelled to do certain duties in the world. You're compelled to act.
No, feminism does not have obligations with it. It's not a government system.
I got you. Premise one, a worldview that has obligations and duties is better than one that doesn't. Hold on, let me finish. Premise two.
Trucks are way better than rainbows. Oh, God.
She doesn't want this to hit.
These are disanalogous.
Stop interrupting.
Well, you're doing a fallacy.
What's the fallacy?
One, the fallacy is that you're being disanalogous.
What? That's not. What are you talking about? What's disanalogous?
That you're comparing feminism to a governmental system.
No.
It's not a governmental system.
I didn't say government.
You did because you said it doesn't have a way of enforcing obligations.
I never said anything.
But the only thing that can enforce obligations is a level of governmental system.
I didn't say enforce obligations with government. I didn't say that. That didn't come out of my mouth.
Okay.
Okay.
Sure.
Premise one. Don't interrupt me. Premise one. A society that has a worldview with obligations and duties is better than one without, right? Feminism doesn't have obligations and duties in its worldview. Conclusion, any worldview that has obligations and duties is better than feminism.
Okay.
Would you like to respond to that?
Yeah, it's just It's
no,
just
those premises. Don't meta Yelp review. Just get to the premises.
Sure. Society with obligations is better than a society without. Yeah, I'm not pro-anarchy.
Okay.
Feminism does not have obligations. In the case of like statehood, yeah, it doesn't. It's not purporting to be a governmental system.
Okay.
This is, again, just a false analogy.
Well, no, it's not an analogy. It's literally a premise with a follow-up.
There are plenty of worldviews that you and I both would agree might be good things that don't have necessary obligations that you are compelled to do. For example,
What?
religion.
That's a contradiction.
Religion is a worldview.
That has duties and obligations.
You are not forced to do anything.
Nobody talked
The
about
church-
force.
the ch-
What's wrong with your brain?
That's what you said.
No one
obligations.
said force.
Then what does obligations mean if you're not compelled to do it?
What do you mean? It's basically like
How
look,
else are you
look,
compelled?
You say you're a Christian, right?
Yeah, how else
Do
are
you
you
have
compelled?
do you have an obligation as a Christian?
To what?
Tell me any obligation on your mangled Christian view that you hold.
I suppose to be honest before God.
Got you. Do you go to jail if you're not honest before God?
No, but
Cool.
now you're changing what obligations
What?
mean.
I just demonstrated you could hold an obligation without any sort of force.
Then why the fuck were you talking about compelled obligations
Because we're
before?
talking about worldviews, right? If you, as a feminist, present feminism against, say, Christianity tonight, and I counter with Christianity that has tenfold obligations and duties baked into it by the argument that you just agreed to, Christianity, which is patriarchal, is better than feminism. It's the end of the debate.
It's just another false dichotomy. You're unironically making it seem like if Christianity exists, then feminism can't. And it's just like...
What? Nobody said that.
Yes, you did.
Look, how do you not know what a defeater is?
All I'm doing, Jimbob, is I'm walking your own thoughts to their nth conclusion, right?
Yeah, you're not dealing with that. Do I need to do it slower?
I am. The issue is that you have changed. So what you're doing is called equivocating. You're muddying a definition.
How?
So obligations, you started by talking about like state obligations, things that you were compelled to do.
She keeps bringing the state in, and I didn't bring the state in the argument.
You explicitly did because you were talking about...
Where is it in my argument?
We were talking about military.
Where is it in my argument? Do you find it there? No.
Sorry. Are you just using obligations as a different word? What, like, why are you using obligation? Well, just before you were talking about obligations as a compelled thing from governments, which the enforcement arm, right? You have a duty to your nation.
Cool.
That's an obligation.
Yeah, that's awesome.
You can be compelled to do it. Now you're talking about obligations. But I think what you mean is values.
I'll do it.
These are not the same thing.
Hold on a second.
So when you say obligations, do you mean things that you can be forced to do or punished if you don't do?
I'll give you another one that's maybe
Answer my
easier.
question. When you are talking about obligations, are you talking about things that you, if you don't
that
do,
you ought to do?
You can not ought.
Yes,
things that
ought.
you can be forced to do.
Well, no. I just demonstrated.
Then feminism does have obligations of what you ought to do.
Okay, cool.
Yeah,
so
of
you're
course it
making
does.
moral ought claims, right?
Well, now because
remember you went here with Jay. Are you sure you want to go there with me?
Yeah, of course, because I fucking dumpstered Jay on that too.
What?
So,
You couldn't tell me. You couldn't tell him or the audience or me why, from a feminist view, we ought to do anything.
I did multiple times. He just didn't accept the premise. As a feminist, you should. So specifically, the ought is that we should try to empower women and promote femininity.
That's an assertion.
Pause. Yes, that's the argument.
That's not an argument. That's an assertion. Do you know what an argument is?
Okay, buddy.
Premise one: we should do the thing in question.
So the evidence for this, of why we ought to do this, is that it is good for a society. It is unavoidable and a necessity to maintain a competitive GDP in a global foreign nation. It is also a morally good thing to basically uplift your sisters in Christ. And I think I got into another one.
Wow, so it's a Christian, you're using a Christian paradigm, or is it mixed? You're doing like a sort of like Chipotle mixed burrito theology?
Well, there's going to be like moral claims. There's some certain Christian, because we share like a similar Christian value. Obviously, we don't hold secular people to Christian moral systems, right? Because they're secular. This is obviously true.
Okay, so how is feminism Christian then?
I've not said that it's Christian necessarily. I'm saying as Christians, it's a good thing.
You just said we should elevate women in Christ. You're smuggling in a Christian view into your feminist view.
Yeah, I'm arguing why I, as a Christian, think that like these feminist values are good. But I'm not saying as a Christian you should be a feminism. You should be a feminist. Sorry.
Well, I mean, okay, so back to the argument. If it's the case that any worldview that has obligations and duties is better than one without, and feminism actually doesn't really have any.
It does have obligations if we're just talking about things that you ought to do as a result of the worldview, right? So like feminism, for example, would say that you ought to respect women. You ought to give them consent. You ought to allow them to like self-determine. You ought to like treat women respectfully. You ought to like look at feminine things and view them as good things. These would be oughts that feminism would make.
Okay,
right?
ought you not, as a feminist, start an OnlyFans?
It's mixed. There's some feminists that are very...
No, you're the one debating tonight.
I don't think that I ought. No, I don't think there's any feminist who would say that you ought to.
I didn't talk about any feminist. You're the feminist in the seat right now.
I don't think...
Ought we, from your view, ought your friend be an OnlyFans chick?
No, I don't think it's a moral good to be an OnlyFans chick.
Okay, so she ought not.
Feminism would be pretty neutral on that by and large. My feminist view would be that you get to self-determine, right? So you get to make that choice.
So if you ought to self-determine and she determines that she should be an online prostitute, then she ought be an online prostitute,
Well, this is no longer an ought statement. At this point, the only ought statement is that women should be allowed to self-determine. After that, what she chooses to do isn't necessarily morally good or morally bad. We have to look at the actual behavior itself to evaluate if her choice in that behavior was morally good or morally bad. The ought of feminism is just letting women make choices.
So when is it in the behavior you determine that it's bad?
Sorry, I got distracted by that person's PFP because it was funny. Say that again.
When in the process of an action do you determine it's bad?
Super complicated. Depends on your like moral system.
What a surprise.
Yeah, well, of course, like the moral system. So like if this feminist, for example, is a utilitarian, then we might like look at something like, does porn negatively impact men and does sex work negatively impact you? And I would say like for the majority of men and women, both of these things are negative. So that at a utilitarian level, that individual might decide you should not do porn.
Wait, this is contrary with your first ethical system, which is merely that you should have a say in what you're doing is ultimately the primary ethical view, is that you have a choice in the matter, that you can will your own behavior.
No, this isn't super complicated. You asked what are some of the oughts of feminism. One of the oughts of feminism is that women should be able to choose what they do. But that doesn't mean that all of their choices are morally good or morally bad.
Ought women have children if they can?
Again, I don't think it's a moral good to have children, no.
It's not a moral good to have children?
No.
Okay, so how do you determine it's not a moral good to have children?
How do I determine that it's not a moral good?
Yeah, because that's a pretty affirmative statement that it's not a moral good to have children.
I didn't say it's bad, right? I didn't say it's not moral.
It's amoral?
It's neutral, yeah. I think having children's pretty neutral. Pretty much anyone can spread their legs and get sperm dumped into them. I don't think it's like a particularly meaningful thing.
Okay.
No.
And you call yourself a Christian? Do you or not? Are you just LARPing or
what is it? Sorry. Well, I'm assuming that there's an attack here, right? So the eye look is
whole
going,
night is an attack.
Why are you now that we're talking about
trying
women,
to get your worldview? It's all over the fucking place.
You're not really trying to, right? Like,
are you a Christian is a question.
Well, what you're doing is you're equivocating, you're pivoting, you're asking me a bunch of questions. You're not really giving me any space to ask you questions back. What you'll notice
you're
also
the
in this
affirmative.
debate is you have not made a
Who's the
single
affirmative?
Claim. I don't know, because there isn't actually a premise
feminism
question.
is good for society is the affirmative.
That wasn't even what we agreed to debate.
What do you mean?
We talked